I keep a house that hums. There's a rhythm to it. School lunches assembled like tiny edible origami, a breakfast counter that wears coffee stains like battle scars, laundry folded into neat, impatient rectangles. My days are ordinary in the way only someone who runs a home can have, constantly remaking the world so the people inside it can keep living in it. It's not glamorous. It is, however, very necessary, and I take a ridiculous amount of pride in it. One of the things I tend is the small peach tree in the front yard. It's not a specimen you'd find in a magazine spread. Gnarled trunk, crooked branches like an old barista's hands. But it's mine, and it gives. Every summer, it coughs up more fruit than sense. The kind of peaches that smell like the inside of a peach and taste like summer decided to write a love letter. I prune it in the spring. I chase aphids in the early dawn. I talk to it like a mildly disappointed friend. In my mind, this tree is an extension of the household ledger. It pays in jam and slices and the sort of contented, sticky thumbs joy that makes dinner table stories better. Next door, Olivia is a teenager, a careful blend of self-awareness and theatrical small dramas, which is to say normal. Her family's yard ends where mine begins, except for a generous, lazy bend of one branch that leans over her side, as if the tree itself enjoys the neighborly gossip. I've always been fine with that. I leave a few peaches for Olivia sometimes. Teenagers are windows in storms. They need snacks and sweetness and the tiny, unsanctioned comforts that make adolescence tolerable. It felt neighborly and good. If she wanted a few peaches, take them. I'd spent entire afternoons canning enough jam to wallpaper a small city. Sharing meant less waste, more smiles, simple arithmetic. Peaches given equals community maintained. What's at stake, I told myself, wasn't a fruit-bearing sapling. It was the quiet code of our block. Small courtesies that stitch people into being neighbors rather than strangers. It was summer rituals. Jars of jam on a windowsill, a pie for a teacher, the smell of fruit simmering while the kids wrestle in the sprinkler. It was my right to feel small pleasures in a world that asks a lot from invisible work. I guess I also cared because those peaches tasted like a tiny victory, proof that tending could pay off. So I let Olivia take a few. It was nothing dramatic, but like most good setups, the little ordinary kindness planted the seeds for something much messier. A week later, I started noticing holes in the ledger. Not a financial ledger, my mental orchard ledger, which I keep in the sort of obsessive maternal headspace where you can precisely tell how many jars of jam should have been canned by now. The tree looked thinner. Not dramatically, but enough that my spidey mom sense tingled. I do this thing where I can eyeball a branch and know whether it should be carrying 5, 7, or 12 peaches. That morning, it felt like somebody had quietly edited my numbers with a big, rude eraser. I did the sensible, fully grown-up thing and went next door with a smile that said, "I'm fine, but also please explain." Olivia was in the driveway with earbuds in, practicing the theatrics of being a human who is both very online and very exhausted. I asked, very reasonably, if she'd noticed taking more peaches than usual. She blinked, pulled one earbud out, and gave me the exact tone teenagers reserve for "you're being dramatic, Mom." What? No. I always take, 3, maybe 4 if my friends are over. I leave you the rest. I stood there and tried to reconcile my internal inventory with her math. 3, 4, okay. That had been the cadence forever. But the cadence had changed. This was mid-July. The branches should have been sagging like they were trying to confess something. There should have been peaches falling in little apologetic thuds onto the grass, a lazy harvest that made dust smell like jelly. Instead, there were gaps, like teeth pulled out by an inattentive dentist. I did the thing people do when confronted with disappointment they don't want to address. I put the work off. I left a few peaches where they hung, fat and stubborn, as if leaving them alone would save them from whatever invisible glutton had been snacking my summer. I closed the door on the front porch and told myself I'd look at it later. I told myself I deserves a small break from policing fruit. Only later I thought, I'll climb the ladder, do the rounds, inventory the branches, maybe confront the universe or Olivia or raccoons, whichever confessed first. For now, the sight of the tree felt like a tiny betrayal, and I couldn't bear to stare at it long enough to plan a polite intervention. The next morning, I decided the procrastination had aged long enough. I was going to climb the ladder, tally the fruit, and do what needed doing. Sun was the kind that makes everything smell like nostalgia: cut grass, sunscreen, and that impossible peach perfume. I set the ladder against the trunk, boots on the lowest rung, reached up, and froze. There was Olivia, mid-stretch, one hand draped over the neighborly branch like she owned a timeshare, the other scooping a peach with the focus of someone performing a minor surgery. Her face was a study in concentrated bliss, like she'd discovered gravity and dessert in the same moment. For about 2 seconds, I hovered between irritation and disbelief, and then every bit of the I run a house part of me clicked into gear. "Excuse me," I said, which translated to, "Explain yourself," politely. She jerked like I'd lobbed a pebble at her earbud. Peach in hand, she looked like a kid caught with their hand in metaphorical cookie jar, except the cookie was sticky and smelled like a warm porch swing. I let the scolding come out sharper than I'd intended, because that's what happens when your small courtesies are treated like an all-you-can-eat buffet. "Olivia, seriously? You're taking them right now, from my side. Do you know how many jars of jam I had planned? How much of my week this is?" She only lasted about a heartbeat before the soundtrack switched. Her shoulders slumped. Her eyes got that honest, guilty shine teenagers have when they realize consequences are not fictional. Then she started to cry. Not huge, cinematic tears, but the small, messy, embarrassed leaks of someone who'd been caught by a person they respect. "I'm so sorry," she blurted. "They're just, Mrs. V, they're just so good. Like they're the best thing ever, and I can't stop. I thought I'd been leaving enough. I really did. I'm so sorry. This summer has been hard. And when they're there, it's like a tiny miracle, and I keep thinking I'll leave more, but then I don't. I didn't mean to." The confession tumbled out like fruit from an overripe branch. She admitted she'd underestimated how bad this year's yield was on our side. Fewer peaches to go around, and how the ones that did appear were like contraband. They became, she said, a private loophole of sweetness she clung to when everything else felt chaotic. Mostly I was confused. Part of me wanted to be furious. Territory and trust and the basic math of jar making were at stake. Part of me wanted to laugh at the theatricality of it all. A teenage girl reduced to a peach-fueled repentant, standing on my lawn like a tiny, sticky penitent. Instead, I did the thing I'd been practicing on myself for years. I listened. I heard her reasons. Embarrassed, honest, oddly earnest. And under the irritation, there was a current of sympathy. Teenagers hoard joy because the world makes it a scarce currency. That fact didn't erase the missing peaches, but it softened the edges of the betrayal. "I get that they're good," I said finally, because speaking measuredly is the adult version of wielding a rake. "I also get that you can't, restrain yourself, but you can't treat them like they're free for all. This is my tree, Olivia. I share. I don't share like a bank with no balance." She sniffed, wiped at the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand, and managed a small, sheepish laugh through tears. I know. I thought I was leaving enough. I promise I'll stop. No more reaching over. I'll only take from my side." Her apology was real enough to mend a little of the sting, but apologies don't plant extra peaches. They don't fix a season that's already gone thin. Standing there with peach juice on my palm and a kid across my fence who'd confessed to a summer-long peccadillo, I felt oddly, quietly empowered. Not because I'd caught her, but because I could choose how to respond. I let the ladder lean back against the trunk, wiped my hands on my jeans, and said the thing that would sit in my head for weeks like a small, stubborn plan. "All right, you stop. We talk about this again if it happens. For now, go home and finish whatever homework or drama you were avoiding with my fruit." She left, slower than when she'd arrived, one hand sticky, one hand empty. I stood there in the warm light and realized confession hadn't restored what was missing. It had only cleared the air and given me a clear target for what needed doing next, which felt like the beginning of my revenge, although I wasn't ready to call it that. By the time leaves started flirting with the gutter, I'd stopped stewing and started hiring. Transplanting a tree is not goosebumps and gardenia romance. It is logistics, loans of muscle, and carefully timed digging. I wanted the tree moved an arm's length back into the sacred geography of my yard, so its fruit could no longer be moonlighting on someone else's turf. This was not petty. This was boundary maintenance dressed as horticulture. The crew arrived with a little orchestra of clanking, a truck that smelled faintly of diesel and optimism, shovels that had seen better Saturdays, and one hydraulic thing that looked like a ginormous metal crab. I supervised like a project manager who also loved jam, short meetings, decisive directives, and the occasional overly specific demand about where the ladder should live next summer. The root ball came out of the ground with more fanfare than the high school marching band across the street. We wrapped it, hoisted it, and set it down on my side of the line, with the kind of ceremonial precision usually reserved for furniture or very small pets. Olivia watched from her driveway with the apologetic circumference of a person who's understood the rules but had temporarily misread them, like a strange fruit-based map. She walked over as the last handful of dirt was smoothed into place, shoes scuffed, head down. Her apology this time was quieter. No theatrical leaks, just a neat, humble delivery. "I'm really sorry," she said. "I should have thought about how much you rely on those." Her voice clipped itself like she'd practiced stopping before it got mushy. I surveyed the newly re-landscaped boundary, mulched like a sunburst, a small, proud mound where the trunk now stood wholly on our side. There was a practical satisfaction in seeing the tree claim its proper coordinates. There was also a deliciously administrative joy in knowing the problem had been solved without drama. Move the source, shut down the theft. Sometimes justice is a wheelbarrow. "You're forgiven," I said, because forgiveness is cheap and freeing, and also because I am not made of grudges. That's the whole point. Then I added the part that felt like the bow on a very sensible package. "But I'll save you some peaches next year. I'll set aside a box at the top of the harvest. Think of it as official allotment." Her relief was visible, like someone who'd found a lost homework assignment under the couch. "Really? Thank you. Mrs. V, I'll do better. I promise." I told her what I'd actually planned, a labeled crate system. A small wooden box would live on my porch during harvest, clearly tagged with a polite note, "Olivia's share, 1 peach per visit, please." And a tiny jar of jam would be tucked inside come winter, as a reminder that boundaries and generosity can coexist. It felt adult in the way only domestic diplomacy can. We were setting clear terms and then ritualizing the kindness so it didn't get porous. The season after the move was generous. The branches leaned obligingly toward our side like guests who know where the party is. I spent afternoons canning while music played, and the kids traded peach sticky high fives in the backyard. When I brought the first crate over to Olivia's porch the next summer, 3 peaches wrapped in a tea towel and a note that said, "For being human," she opened the door and grinned with a kind of humble, private joy that was almost too big for her face. There's a funny, empowering lesson I kept in my pocket after all of it. Being small and kind doesn't mean being soft. Reclaiming what you've tended is not punitive. It's respectful. I'd wanted the peaches to stay a simple, neighborly currency, not a loophole. Moving the tree felt like rewriting the terms of a contract with a gentle but firm pen. The jam tastes the same. The kids still crowd the kitchen, and the smell of simmering fruit is still the summer hymn it always was. In the end, I didn't want the dramatic, cinematic revenge I'd half imagined at 3 a.m. I wanted something steadier. Clarity, a new fence, even if invisible, and peace of mind. That feels a lot like victory.